I would like to introduce our next and final speaker for today, Abby. Abby is the Deputy Chair of our Youth Council Committee, and this is the second time that she will be sharing her personal journey with mental illness.
Depression and suicide are difficult subjects to talk about. It can be difficult to know what to say, and for that reason I think a lot of people choose to say nothing at all. All this does is further isolate the person struggling. It's important to tell our stories in safe places, so today I'll be doing my best to tell mine. I wouldn't say my childhood was average, but I wouldn't say it was bad either. Aside from a few traumatic events as a child, including a violent divorce, near-fatal car crash, and the passing of my grandfather, by 12 years old, everything seemed on track. And for the most part, everything was on track until my friend's birthday in October 2013. We'd just watched Insidious 2 at the cinemas, and we were waiting to get the bus home when a group of adults held us up, robbed us, and made violent threats. Thankfully, police became involved before the situation escalated. However, this event took a bigger toll on my mental well-being than I could ever acknowledge. I was adamant I didn't need counselling at the time. I tried my best to forget what had happened and refused to talk to anyone about it. After this, I started to notice my anxiety, more so how heightened it had become. I was always quite anxious as a child, but I had started struggling with things that I never used to struggle with. I stopped going out in public unless I had someone bigger than me around to protect me. I constantly looked over my shoulder. I wouldn't even go to the toilet in public places without someone waiting for me in close proximity. I also saw how much the anxiety began to affect my last couple months of Year 7. I was noticeably more socially awkward, and I no longer felt safe and protected around the friendship group that I had established. In 2014, at 13 years old, a few months after being held up, I decided it was time to seek help for how it was affecting my life and how it was affecting me. Honestly, I didn't see the change I was hoping for from counselling. My issues stemmed from a mistrust in adults, and I wasn't willing to be vulnerable around my therapist, who was just another adult I didn't know. And when I was vulnerable, I felt dismissed. I began to self-harm and shortly after stopped attending therapy. My anxiety was making it difficult to go to school, but my constant absence put a huge target on my back for bullies. It was easy to pick on the girl that wasn't around half of the time to defend herself. When I did go to school, I never knew what I was walking into, but I always knew it was going to be pretty bad. By midway through Year 8, I'd missed more school than I had attended. Eventually, the bullying, which had now become physical, constant unprovoked panic attacks and anxiety had got too much to handle. I'd only heard horror stories of high school dropouts and the opportunities they throw away with them. But anything seemed better than what I was facing at school, so dropping out of Year 8 was a chance that I took. My experiences in life were making me feel too old for my physical age. I started gravitating towards older people I felt I could relate to. At the time I was unaware, but I was trauma bonding, befriending people who had been through similar traumatic events, which put myself in increasingly dangerous and impulsive situations. Hanging out with people who expected no healthy behaviour from me, no change, no boundaries. I didn't realise how enabling this is for me and for my friends. I spent the remainder of the year sleeping or doing dumb impulsive things that gave me a rush of adrenaline. Living with anxiety and depression was becoming exhausting. I felt stuck in this never-ending cycle, a never-ending battle with myself. I spent so much time sleeping, but I still woke up exhausted, an indescribable type of exhausted that followed me throughout the day. I started to forget who I was aside from the depression. I lost my hobbies. I lost interest in everything that made me different and unique. I didn't know who I was without the sadness and suffering anymore. I thought about suicide a lot throughout the year, but it was a thought that I kept to myself. By the end of 2014, everything was plummeting downhill at a rate faster than I could keep up. I was not speaking to or seeing my dad at all, and my relationship with my mum was falling apart rapidly. I had no plans for schooling. My self-harm was increasing and becoming more serious. My depression was worsening. I'd been through about 4 different therapists and 3 different medications and had received a clinical diagnosis for my anxiety and depression. I started to lose hope that this was something that would improve or pass. At the start of 2015, at 14 years old, I made my first disclosure about thinking of ending my life. This led me to my first admission in the psychiatric ward. I was placed on a different medication and received another mental health diagnosis. I started Year 9 at an alternate schooling program. I enjoyed every minute of Year 9. I made good friends, I had supportive teachers, I learnt so much. I didn't have the added anxiety from bullying like I did at my old school. Things should have been improving for me, but those persistent suicidal feelings stayed. My mood was becoming increasingly unstable. I was experiencing extremely high highs and unbearingly low lows. I was becoming erratic. Every little setback was getting harder and harder to bounce back from. I had another stay in the psychiatric ward, and then another, and then another. Over the course of 2015, I had totaled 5 admissions. My mum really didn't know how to support me, so she made the decision to place me in government care for 90 days, and I was placed in a residential care facility. I'd convinced myself I was unwanted, unloved, and unlovable, and whilst I understand my mum's reasoning for making that decision now, at the time it just confirmed those thoughts. I returned home, and shortly after, things looked like they were improving again. My relationship with my mum was healing. We had so many more resources available to us from my time in Resi. But depression and anxiety don't just go away, and I'd checked out a while before that. Out of everything I had been through and everything I'd already overcome, the mental exhaustion was one of the hardest. No matter how persistent I could be in continuing, I felt I was fighting a losing battle. I had everything to fight for but nothing to give. So I attempted to take my life and came close to succeeding. The month that followed was spent in hospital, 2 weeks in intensive care and 2 weeks at my final psych ward admission. 3 days after leaving hospital, my stepdad moved me up to Gladstone permanently. By 2016, at 15 years old, I had lived in Gladstone for a little over a month, and I began finding things that helped me to help myself. My road to recovery was strenuous and, most importantly, everlasting. I started going to the gym, and I know I used to roll my eyes whenever people told me to exercise because it's the last thing you feel like doing when you're depressed. But the effect it had on my well-being was incredible. I felt strong physically and mentally. During the day, I'd attend online schooling through distance education, which gave me the support I needed to finish Year 10 whilst focusing purely on my schoolwork and not having to worry about social interactions. Of an afternoon, I'd attend DBT with my mum. This was a year of intensive group therapy. However, it was working, and I could tell it was working. My mum and I had a new way of communicating, and I had so many new tools and ways to manage my emotions and implement healthy coping mechanisms. Perhaps one of the most valuable things I discovered was Buddhism and meditation. I threw myself pretty heavily into Buddhist teachings, using what I learned not to be a better Buddhist, but a better person in general. Buddhist philosophy is forgiving. Nothing is fixed or permanent, and change is always possible. This can be extremely comforting, like it is for me, depending on perception. Life will always be imperfect, but it will always be what I make of it, and I can change direction anytime. I spent so many years trying to avoid my feelings, to avoid the suffering in my everyday life, and Buddhism taught me quite simply to sit with those feelings, to confront them and know that, like anything, they too will pass. The avoidance of suffering is a form of suffering, and the avoidance of struggle is a struggle. A month after turning 16, I started renting and living independently. I had to do things for myself, and I was able to celebrate the achievements of being able to do them, all the adulty things without really being an adult. I appreciated more. I understood the importance of looking after myself, for myself. Don't get me wrong, I still have my ups and downs. Those days where relapse seems imminent and it seems all too easy to fall back into cycles of depression. Life will probably always be a roller coaster ride for me, but I'm getting better at recognising the signs, recognising my reactions, and showing myself the kindness and forgiveness that I hold myself to show others. Some days I feel stagnant, other days I look back and realise that I've moved mountains. There's been many triumphs to celebrate since my attempt. There's also been many more negative experiences, but a common is that I bounce back. Each time I bounce back quicker, I bounce back stronger. Whilst I've sat in my sadness, I no longer unpack my bags. Without negative experiences, we could never truly appreciate the good ones. Like Buddhism taught me a new way to love myself, my mental health journey taught me a new way to view the world, a new way to appreciate opportunities I otherwise would have missed. This year I turned 20, and I'm grateful to be here today. I'm grateful to be telling my story because a few years ago I never could have imagined anything remotely positive coming out of it. Thank you for listening.